That must be wild.
Okay. Ready, I think.
Yes.
Share screen. Farm bill. Slideshow. Is it okay? It looks good. Like the share screen is working okay?
It just on mine, it just says host sharing, but I don't actually see it. Is it the same for you, Kathy?
Same thing.
Okay, do you mind sharing it yourself, Brett?
Yes.
Okay.
Oops.
Lindsay, my co-host.
All right. Can y'all see it?
We see the script.
Oh, stop that. One more try. How about now?
Perfect. Yep.
I'm gonna let everyone in now. Okay.
Break a leg, everyone.
Cool.
Oops, sorry. Hey y'all, thanks for coming. Good to see everyone. If folks want to start introducing themselves in the chat with name, pronouns, where you're calling from, and like any things you're looking to take away from today or goals of like what you're trying to get from this training about the Farm Bill. And it's 12:04. I see some folks are still joining, but I want to make sure we have enough time. So I think we'll get started if that's okay with everyone. So yeah, this is a Farm Bill 101 intro, kind of talking about the past, present, and potential of the Farm Bill, which some folks call the Swiss Army knife of bills. And I am Brett. I'm with Slow Food USA as the Farm Bill organizer, community organizer, and I will pass it to Lindsay to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to meet you. My name is Lindsay Farrell. I am the Grassroots Advocacy Coordinator with the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. Slow Food is a member of ours, and we advocate for organizations like Slow Food up on the Hill in Washington, D.C. I'm actually calling in today from Philadelphia, but I'm based in Washington, D.C. with my colleague, Kathy Day. She's super smart and awesome, and I'm so glad that she's here as well. I'll pass it to you, Kathy.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I'm Kathy Day. I'm the Climate Policy Coordinator at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. So Lindsay and I are each parts of two of the largest teams on the INSAC staff. And so I work directly with lawmakers and with administrators on the Hill to help shape what policy looks like.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. So kind of jumping in, something that every time I think about the Farm Bill, I try and have my racial equity lens on, because the Farm Bill has never addressed the fact that the United States food system is built on stolen land from indigenous people that was then cultivated by forced labor of enslaved African people. And so everything in the Farm Bill is built on that foundation. And yet it has never addressed it, but it has to, right? You don't need to look far to see all the places where racism is built into the structures of our current food and farm policy. Again, in the economic system of slavery enshrined in our constitutions, the military force backed up by legislation, and then more recent federal policies, as well as discrimination within our USDA and grants and all that. So as we look at the Farm Bill, and this will become more prevalent later, how we actually utilize a racial equity lens in practice, but we always want to make sure we are thinking of structural racism and how the Farm Bill and our farming system in the US is rooted in that. So the original Farm Bill was really 3 separate bills, but all related, and they were enacted in the 1930s as part of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. The goals were essentially to ensure an adequate food supply, to keep food prices fair, both for farmers and consumers, and to protect and sustain the country's vital resources. That last one, some folks forget about, but the Dust Bowl was during this time. And so we were already thinking of climate-related policy as part of the Farm Bill. And this was all a direct response to both the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. And so while the Farm Bill has changed a lot, its primary goals are very much the same. What's changed a bit more is what drives the modern Farm Bill. So I like to think of the Farm Bill as a train. And you might even, I live right next to a train station, so you might hear a train at some point, and it's just the Farm Bill. But if you think of the bill as a long freight train, it basically has 2.5 powerful engines up front. So one, running since the 1930s, would be programs that support growing different staple, non-perishable, and generally stable commodities like corn and soybeans and rice, wheat, peanuts, sugar, cotton, dairy, and other products. In its modern form, we call it the commodity engine or the commodity title, and it also includes crop insurance and different types of subsidies. The other large engine is the nutrition title. So the biggest part of that is SNAP, the Supplementary Nutritional Assistance Program, which is previously known as food stamps. So those two are super strong, and they're kind of seen as must pass. The third, which is also popular and has been part of it since the beginning, but is becoming more prevalent, is the conservation programs. And again, that's just being seen as more and more prevalent. So these engines are pulling together kind of because they have universal support. So they're supported in rural, suburban, and urban areas, which means almost all legislators support them. So as our Farm Bill is expanding, we're able to get these other individual cars, with the miscellaneous title being the caboose, kind of pulled along with these more kind of, again, must-pass bills. So while the agriculture committees can sometimes deal with specific subjects in separate freestanding legislation, the Farm Bill has some big advantages as its train. It provides a predictable opportunity for comprehensive treatment of food and agriculture issues. There's plenty of opportunities to trade votes and build support, right? Because again, it's seen as this big must-pass bill that folks are paying attention to. And it reduces the authorizing work done by the committees in intervening years. So it lets them focus on regulation. So the Farm Bill is a huge piece of legislation, hundreds of pages, and it's the principal federal legislation that creates and modifies farm, food, and nutrition and rural development programs. It sets the rules of the road for our nation's farm and food system. It influences what's grown by incentivizing its production of some crops like corn and soybeans over others like vegetables. It determines who grows it by determining who has capital and access to land and management tools. It determines how it's grown by supporting programs that reward some production systems over others. It determines what's done with those products and where they're sold by helping farmers process and add value to their crops by creating new market opportunities. It determines who has access to the crops and the food through nutrition programs, and it also determines how we invest in rural communities through dozens of programs that support rural broadband, healthcare, community facilities, energy production, and so much more. So what's done with everything and where it's sold and how it's grown is all determined by the Farm Bill. And the Farm Bill is kind of unusual because it's considered by Congress every 5 years. So they can create new programs, modify existing programs, or end programs that seem no longer relevant. Very few bills are receiving this type of scrutiny, and it's one of the reasons that President Obama called it the Swiss Army knife of bills, because as you can see, it has a tool for everything. If you don't like trains, you can think of it as a Swiss Army knife, but it really does have an opportunity to affect so many parts of our food system. And I'm going to pass it to Kathy.
Thanks, Brett. So one of the big pieces to understand about the bill is how it gets put together. And it starts out in committees on either side of Congress. So in the House Agriculture Committee and in the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. And both of those committees put together their own versions of the bill. They decide what belongs in there. They have conversations among themselves, and eventually they vote on whether it should exit the committee. And at that point, on both sides, it will go out to the floor. It will go out to the full House of Representatives, out to the full Senate. And each of those will then have a chance to vote, to add amendments, to change the bills, and to send each of them on forward again. And at that point, once they pass out of the House and out of the Senate, they go to conference committee. And that's the technical background. In actuality, oftentimes there are a lot of backdoor conversations that happen outside of the full conference committee situation. But in theory, everything is happening in conference committee to pull together a single bill out of those two potentially very disparate bills. And then once there is a final conference committee version, it goes back to the House and back to the Senate. They vote again on the floor. And once they have passed the bill on the floor, it then goes to the White House for signature, and it's then law and moves on to its next stage, which is going to be how it gets implemented in practice within the USDA. So at that level of change and understanding, one of the things we need to understand is that there are certain people that have a great deal of influence over the bill. And so some of those people are going to be all of the people on the committee. Some of the people are going to be people who just have very strong influence in the particular ag states and may or may not be on the committee. But for the most part, those who actually sit on the House and Senate Agriculture committees have a great deal of influence. And particularly if they chair those committees, they have a really strong influence. And so out of those 4 people on these new committees, we have Debbie Stabenow, who's the only person out of the 4 who's actually carried out a farm bill before. So for that reason, she has a lot of standing and she has a lot of influence over what the farm bill looks like this time around. She's leadership on the Democratic side in the Senate. In the Senate, we have Boozman on the Republican side. He is the minority leader. So he's the head of the Republican side of the Senate. Even though he's not the chair of the committee, he still has a lot of influence because he can influence what other Republicans on the committee want to lean on. On the House side, we have G.T. Thompson and David Scott, the representatives on that side sitting on the committee. Both of them are new to chairing the committee or to leading the committee. David Scott was chair in the last session of Congress. G.T. Thompson is chair this time because the Republicans have taken over the House. And so each of them, in addition to representing their own interests from their own states, is going to have a great deal of influence over what happens within the committee. And so that will really shape what the Farm Bill ends up looking like as a result. So I'm going to pass it back to Brett to talk a little bit more about what's in the Farm Bill.
Sorry about that. So there's a lot of legislation in the Farm Bill. Almost all of the legislation is authorizing language. Authorizing language means it contains text that creates or modifies programs. Sometimes the language is really specific but it often glosses over complexities that are then sorted out later at USDA. So if we have our racial equity goggles on, you think about this as a way to be ensuring racial equity is enshrined in our Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill always includes language about how farm and food programs should work at some level. So how long a program should continue, whether it's permanent or expires, who can use it, like eligibility criteria, definitions of different types of producers, priority status, like if they want to have a bill that prioritizes new and beginning farmers. A really important thing to know is the text will also define how a program is funded. The funding can either be mandatory or discretionary. Mandatory funding is just what it sounds like. It means it's guaranteed to be funded every year. Discretionary funding means it's subject to congressional budgets and appropriations that are determined each year. So if there's a program that we know are going to support marginalized farmers, we want to ensure that that program receives mandatory funding, right? That's what we're going to advocate for. Because discretionary funding kind of leaves it up to Congress each year, and it's a lot more vulnerable. In the case of grants, the Farm Bill can also determine the maximum amount that can be awarded, the length of the grant, and other things, like if it requires matching funds. That's something I've heard a lot of feedback from small farmers that is just inaccessible because the funding is awesome, but if they have to fundraise that much amount on their own, it might not actually be accessible to them. It's also important to note that not all programs that are authorized in the Farm Bill are implemented right away, and sometimes they never come to fruition at all. So authorizing language is a really important first step, but there is still a lot that has to be figured out down the road. I'll pass it back to Kathy to talk about some titles.
All right. Thanks again, Brett. So there are 12 titles in the current Farm Bill. We're still operating based on the 2018 Farm Bill. And those 12 titles cover a wide range of things. We're going to talk in a minute about things that this bill does not cover, that often are surprising to discover it doesn't cover. But in terms of the things that are in the bill, we start with commodities, and as Brett pointed out, that is one of the big drivers of the bill. It covers things like price and income support for farmers, those things that are widely produced, that are non-perishable. So wheat, corn, soybeans, rice, things like that are supported in the structure of the Farm Bill. It also includes things like dairy and sugar, as well as agricultural disaster assistance. And again, as Brett mentioned, conservation is another one of the larger titles of the Farm Bill in terms of funding, keeping in mind the biggest one we're going to talk about in a minute. But among some of the top titles, commodities and conservation. And conservation covers programs that help farmers to implement natural resource conservation efforts. They help to shape what's happening on pasture, on cropland. And they also include, that title also includes land retirement and easement programs. So all of it is intended to improve the environmental condition of farmland and ensure that farmland isn't passing into urban development, for example. The third title is trade. So that covers a lot of things related to international trade as well as domestic. So things like food export subsidy programs, international food aid programs, things that end up supporting agricultural production in the US in much the same way that the commodities title itself helps to support that production. And then Title IV nutrition, that's where SNAP comes in, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That is far and away the largest piece of the Farm Bill in terms of funding. About 3/4 of the funding in the Farm Bill is dedicated to SNAP and other nutrition programs that are associated with it. So obviously that makes a lot of sense. The whole goal of farming ultimately is to feed us all. And so SNAP ensures that people in families around the country have access to the food support that they need to eat. Title V is credit. So that includes things like federal loan programs that help farmers access financial credit, direct loans, loan guarantees, and helps them grow and sustain their farming operations. Rural development covers a sort of a variety of things, but it includes things that help foster rural economic growth and business development and community development. Also covers things like rural housing, infrastructure, and some energy pieces as well. And then Title VII, research, extension, and related matters. Financially speaking, this is a relatively small title, but in terms of impact, it's huge. It affects everything that we understand about how to do farming well, how to do conservation well, how to improve environmental conservation around the country that is in any way related to farming. So it really helps by supporting federal labs, existing programs within USDA, as well as those that are affiliated with universities. So a lot of grants go to university agricultural programs via the Title VII funding and provide training for those who are learning to be researchers and those who are early career researchers to do good research on how farming should look in the future. Title VIII is forestry, and you can probably guess what that one's all about. That's supporting our forestry programs around the country, and the Forest Service is part of that funding, even though it seems like quite a different thing. It's looped together with this, and in many ways has a lot of similar ways of functioning to what the rest of the agriculture title does in terms of how funding goes out. And then Title IX is energy. And I mentioned that there's some energy and rural development. That which is in the energy title is more focused on things like growing and processing crops for biofuel, ranches and business owners installing renewable energy systems, although there's also some of that in the rural development title, and supporting research related to energy. So there are a few things that are a bit distributed across different titles just because of the history of where they ended up. And the Title X is horticulture. One of the things that's important to recognize there is that that is where a lot of the organic farming pieces of the Farm Bill are located. So everything to do with certification and supporting organic farming certification processes. It also is where we get a lot of support for the local food programs, and research and infrastructure. Again, things go cross titles a bit. Research and infrastructure for specific kinds of crops like fruits and vegetables and other horticultural crops. Title XI is crop insurance, and along with commodities and conservation, aside from that 3/4 of funding that's in SNAP and the other nutrition programs, this is the other really big funding piece of the title. So that is where we get premium subsidies to farmers. We're helping them to pay for their insurance out of government money. And that is helping to ensure that when they have big losses, they're able to stay in business. And it also provides the risk management agency, which is essentially who runs the crop insurance system, with the authority to change and improve the crop insurance system. But one thing to know about the crop insurance system is that even though RMA is in charge of running it through USDA, the actual insurance happens through private companies. So there are 14 companies that have contracts with USDA to carry out the day-to-day with farmers. And that is all happening through Title XI. And then Title XII is miscellaneous. So as you might guess, it's a bit of a catch-all, but it brings together 6 advocacy and outreach areas. So that includes beginning, socially disadvantaged, and veteran farmers and ranchers. So those are big areas where we are consistently pushing for support on our end. It also includes things like agricultural safety and workforce development and livestock health. So it's a bit of different things that are related to other places and other parts of the titles, but are brought together here, partly for lack of somewhere else that's a great fit. Okay, so all of that is in the Farm Bill, but we're going to look a little bit at what is not in the Farm Bill because that's a little bit surprising. So that's on the next slide. And that slide will tell you some things that, like I said, are going to surprise you a little bit. So for example, farm worker rights and protections are not part of the Farm Bill, which goes back to that history with kind of the racial structural injustice that the Farm Bill was built on. Because a lot of the people at the time that the first Farm Bill was passed in 1933 were people who were not supported by the larger power structures, which was there were people of color who were mostly farm workers as well as domestic workers. And so that is part of the reason that farm workers did not get built into the Farm Bill as it is. And so those things tend to be dealt with in other areas of legislation. We also have things like support for the women, infants, and children programs, which are a lot like SNAP, but are their own track for supporting nutrition, school meals, public grazing rights, renewable fuel standard, even though it's related to those energy pieces, it's its own separate piece. And there are also things like programs that run through the EPA, the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, that are, of course, not part of the Farm Bill title because the Farm Bill titles are mostly oriented at things housed within USDA, and EPA is a whole separate entity. And I've got safety guidelines for food, dietary guidelines, and regulation of GMO foods and food products. Those are all things that are controlled through other elements of legislation and don't come into the Farm Bill title itself. And so they aren't really up for discussion as much in this Farm Bill year. So next, we'll look a little bit at the spending. I gave you a little bit of the breakdown already, but this gives you a lovely visual so it really comes home. All of that orange is nutrition funding. And as you can see, more than 3/4 of the 2018 Farm Bill's spending. It's quite a bit. If you set those aside, you have those 3 other programs that I pointed out as being really important in terms of funding. The crop insurance programs, and these are groups of programs, not programs by themselves, but crop insurance program, the commodities programs, and the conservation programs. Those together with the nutrition make up almost all of the Farm Bill funding. A lot of these other priorities that include the things that help to build the local food system, that help to reinforce the research that gets us to the best possible practices. All of those things are in that tiny little light blue sliver. So horticulture, I mentioned, covers the organic system, for example. All of that gets squashed into a relatively small amount of funding. So when we think about the things that are supporting us in transforming our food system, an awful lot of them are focused just in that little blue sliver. All right. And so we've just looked at this. And so what is the largest Farm Bill title by dollar amount? Can I have somebody point to it? Oh, yes, we've got nutrition, the largest section of the Farm Bill. And so it's really important to remember that part of the reason the Farm Bill gets passed every year is because there is a lot of support in a lot of Congress, at least, and certainly across the country, for ensuring that people get fed. And so that nutrition title is vital for helping the Farm Bill to move through Congress. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it back to Brett to talk a bit more in depth about that.
So as y'all saw, SNAP is by far the largest Farm Bill program by dollar amount, formerly known as food stamps. It's when recipients receive a monthly allowance on their EBT card. For most recipients, SNAP supplements a family's food budget. However, for nearly 4 in 10 households that receive food assistance, it's the only way that families are paying for their groceries. So it is a huge importance to uplifting and supporting our communities and making sure folks have food to eat. Last year, the USDA modernized the Thrifty Food Plan, although I guess at this point it was the end of 2021, so I'm still adapting. But the update basically increased the maximum SNAP benefit by 21%. So it raised the average benefit per person per day from $1.20 to about $5.45. So that lifted 2.4 million SNAP participants, including over 1 million children above the poverty line. So that was huge. So SNAP is, there's that train, Farm Bill. SNAP is the biggest program in nutrition, but there are many other programs. The 2 other large ones are the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP, which is a means-tested federal nutrition program that purchases and distributes food to low-income Americans through emergency food providers like food banks. And as you can imagine, this program was huge during COVID. It provided 600 million meals of the 4 billion distributed by the Feeding America Network in 2021. So it is a big, big program that is not only supporting the communities that receive the food, but also the structures that are distributing it. And then finally, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program is a means-tested program for low-income seniors. It provides nutritious food to help supplement their diet. And y'all might have seen or helped donate the boxes at one point during the pandemic. And
So passing back to me, right?
yes, sorry.
All right. Yeah, no problem. Just wanted to make sure. So one of the ways in which we ensure that the Farm Bill has all of the pieces lined up, that we have made it clear that there are certain priorities that we want to see in the next Farm Bill, is marker bills. So marker bills can be passed well in advance of when the Farm Bill year actually comes up. There are some marker bills we've been working on since the Congress before the previous Congress. So for at least 3 to 4 years, almost since the last Farm Bill itself was passed. So The importance of marker bills is that it allows you to really lay out the details of the policy as you want to see it, to garner support for those policies going forward, because you have some time to raise awareness about the details of the policy, and to really ensure that whoever is coming in newly to Congress has a chance to understand more about those bills. Those are great ways to ensure that our programs receive the improvements that they need, that we can introduce new programs that may be needed, that where there are gaps. And so as we get to building those marker bills, a lot of what we do in places like INSAC and what the committees themselves are doing at the same time is get input from farmers and others about what needs to be in the Farm Bill. And that's part of what Lindsay is going to talk about a bit more later, but we use those marker bills as a way to hear from people, build the better thing, and to ensure that we have all the legislation tidily in a row. We've got all our train cars lined up so that they're ready to go into a big Farm Bill. They're not meant to pass by themselves. They're meant to be part of the Farm Bill that we have by the end of the Farm Bill discussion process. All right, so one of the farm bills that we've been working on for quite a while here at INSAC is the Agriculture Resilience Act. It has a goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. And within that framework, it covers a lot of different areas of the Farm Bill. It itself is a fairly long piece of legislation, nowhere on the scale of Farm Bill, which is over 1,000 pages, but it is 100 and some page piece of legislation itself. And the idea is to really drive toward farmer-driven climate solutions. So those that build resilience and that build that mitigation piece that we need, that farming can do both of, and that farming needs on the resilience end to survive the impacts of climate change. So that includes investing in agriculture research. It includes investing in improving soil health a variety of ways, ranging from the existing conservation programs like CSP and EQIP to things like a proposal to allow states to get grants to invest in their own soil health programs, as well as crop insurance itself. There's some tweaks suggested to help crop insurance improve soil health. It also supports farmland preservation through some of the means I've mentioned before. So that includes things like the easement programs to protect farmland and to keep it out of urban development. It also includes helping to transition our systems toward pasture-based livestock, so moving away from concentrated animal feeding operations and their huge environmental side effects and health side effects towards something that is more pasture-based and in the long term has a lot of potential climate benefits relative to the existing system. And then it also promotes a lot of new forms of on-farm and renewable energy and improves the existing forms, and also has a focus on decreasing food waste and composting that waste. And the bill was introduced by Representative Shelley Pingree of Maine. She's been an organic farmer since the 1970s. And all of this focus on climate is important because agriculture itself, according to the EPA measurements, it has about 11% of greenhouse gas emissions. And if you take in the larger sector as a whole, it is much closer to 30% as you take in processing and all of the historical impacts of climate change that we have caused in plowing up farmland over the past 150 years, especially. So there are a lot of ways in which this bill builds towards solutions for greenhouse gases and for resilience across the entire farming system. And it's intended to be part of that larger suite of goals of getting us toward climate solutions across the country as we build from the Inflation Reduction Act of last year that was really focused heavily on climate change improvement. All right, so I think with that, I'm passing it back to Brett one more time.
Yes, so another marker bill that could be really huge and is more on the nutrition side is called Closing the Meal Gap Act. It was introduced by Senator Christian Gillibrand of New York, and it would increase the baseline SNAP benefits, expand SNAP benefits to territories, and eliminate eligibility limits and unrealistic barriers by using the low-cost food plan as the basis for calculating the SNAP formula, and increasing the baseline benefits by approximately 30%. It would permanently authorize the standard medical deduction in every state for seniors and disabled individuals applying for SNAP to receive a minimum of $140. And it would eliminate the cap on the excess shelter deduction. It would also create a plan to transition those who live and work in US territories to SNAP. currently. Many US territories, not all, are under the NAP program, which in short is a block grant. So essentially those territories are receiving X amount of money regardless of needs, regardless of what, how many folks are applying, how many folks are qualifying, whereas SNAP is flexible and can support as many folks that are eligible. And so this would just make it a lot more accessible for US territories to be supporting their constituents. All right, and I'm gonna pass it to Lindsay now to kind of go over, now that we've bombarded you with tons of information about the Farm Bill. And again, it's over 1,000 pages. It is so much, there's so much policy, and Lindsay is gonna kind of unpack how folks can get involved in such a giant piece of legislation.
Thanks, Brett. I'm gonna hopefully attempt to unpack, recognizing that this is gonna be an uphill, not necessarily battle, but definitely an uphill challenge given just the thin margins in Congress at the moment. I want to encourage y'all before I get into my spiel to put questions in the chat. We do have time for a Q&A at the end, recognizing that a lot of information was just thrown at you, and that's okay, and it's good information, and you are by no means expected to be experts on the Farm Bill. The hope is just that we can lay a foundational ground floor for you to build off of as we enter into this next year of advocacy. So the first thing that you can do is to get organized, but y'all are already doing that by working with Slow Food. So good job, congratulations. Step one is already done. I'm gonna put in the chat a link to our signups. If you're interested in getting notifications or information from NSAC, I encourage you to go to this link and sign up for our action alerts and our weekly roundup, both of which are great ways. And I'll chat more a little bit about what these are, but there are two great ways that you could stay in the loop on the Hill. We can go to the next slide. Perfect. So what do? You have all of this great information. You have all this great stuff just waiting to take action. So let's do it. It's important to know and to start by knowing who you're going to be talking to. Basic groundwork to being an effective advocate is to know who represents you and where they stand. You have 2 senators, 1 representative, and each one sits on multiple different committees and multiple different subcommittees in Congress. If you go to govtrack.us, that's a great resource that you can go to find out who you should be talking to and who you should be advocating with. It's important to know who your representatives are, so you know where they stand and whether or not they care about the issues that are important to you. Learn who represents you. It will show you who they are, their party. If you go to If you go to govtrack.us, it'll show you who they are, the party, a little bit more information, and what committees that they are on. They'll also tell you what you are most interested in. If your members of Congress are on an ag committee, for example, or on the Agriculture Appropriations Committee, this info will all be there. They also are especially influential on agriculture and food. Sorry, I'm talking fast and also kind of distracted because I have 2 cats in the corner going crazy. Let's back up a little bit. So finding out who your representatives are and what committees that they are on is important because it'll tell you whether or not they care about agriculture. And if agriculture isn't in their portfolio or something that they take interest in, that's a prime time for you to jump in, give them a call, give them an email, let them know why you care. Listen to what your members are supporting and opposing. I think a lot about offense and defense. This also may be because the Super Bowl is tomorrow, but this will teach you whether or not you should be on the offense or on the defense as a constituent. Offense being you're supporting them, they are a great agriculture advocate, and defense being well, they may be trying to take money from conservation in the upcoming Farm Bill. Let's be on the defense and prepare ourselves. Listen, what your members, oh, sorry, you can go back one more. Great way to also listen and figure out what's going on in your member of Congress's office, member of Congress, your congressperson's office, is to sign up for their email newsletters. Follow them on Facebook and or Twitter, and see recently sponsored bills by issue areas at the govtrack.us link as well. It's a great link, y'all. I would recommend just exploring if you're curious. I personally didn't know that my congressperson was like very into conservation programs until I did my research myself. We can go to the next slide. Learn, stay up to date with what's happening on farm policy. So obviously NSAC does federal work, and you all are doing the state and local work. Be in coalition with each other. I'm sure there are plenty of other food and farm advocates in your community and in your neighborhoods that you should reach out to. Chat with them, talk to them, make sure that you all are on the same page, because ultimately at the end of the day, we just want a more fair food and farm system. So y'all are doing the state and local work, and NSAC is doing the federal work. So I put in the chat our link to join our email list. I really, really encourage you to join if you're interested in staying up to date on marker bills, anything that's going on the Hill. Kathy and I, along with the rest of our team, will be sure to send all that information out to you. Some great food policy journalism exists as well. Fern Ag I'm sorry, I need to zoom in on, I can't see. Fern Ag's Insider Daily Email is also important, as well as Politico's Morning Agriculture email. And Civil Eats is also a great food journalism place as well. I'm not personally familiar with Fern, but I know that Politico and Civil Eats are great resources to have on hand. If you want to bookmark them or subscribe to them, I definitely recommend. As well as email updates from your local office, also super important. So you've done all of that foundational work of, okay, I know who represents me, but what do I do now? You've got a sense of who represents you and where they stand. How do you get on their radar? How do they come to care about things? If they are not sitting on a very large campaign contribution, or if you are not specifically, here are the free ways that you can do this work, and it's by no means time sensitive. Although if you have a freshman representative, the sooner you reach out to start building relationships with them, the better. This is always, always, always important, and also it's part of the longer game in general. Shake hands with them. Introduce yourself to the field office or staff, no matter their position, or your members of Congress. Send invites. Invite members of Congress and their staff to your field day, farmers market, workshop, or celebration. Share news. Win a grant, win an award. Share some great news with your Congress as well, with your congressperson as well. And most importantly, show up. Show up for town halls, including over telephone or Zoom, listening sessions, coffee chats, and in district meetings and in DC meetings on the Hill are always a plus. I know we saw Brian and some Slow Food reps recently at our winter meeting, and they did some great advocating for y'all as well last week. A whole lot of important decisions get made at public meetings where folks may not know to show up, but this is me telling you that you should show up. You should be the person that goes. Does any of this guarantee that they will come to your side on an issue? Does any of this guarantee that they will fight for conservation programs or fight for the Agricultural Resilience Act? No, but it puts you in a really good position as an advocate because you are already on their radar. I want to emphasize too, send invites. That's probably the best way that you can get in contact with your member of Congress. So many folks, and I'm sure Kathy could speak to this too, so many folks that I've heard from in the past couple of months have shared, like my member of Congress had no idea the issues that I was facing on my farm. And then I invited them out, they came, they saw how our soil health was, they saw how much we're struggling in the face of climate change. And now they are considering funding the conservation programs more. So it's really important that you send invites as much as you can. Call your legislators. That's also something that is super important. Speaking from personal experience as someone who is younger, I don't like calling people. I very much don't like calling people. I would much rather send an email than give someone a call. And that may just be my age showing, but I want to emphasize that calling your legislator is probably one of the best things that you can do. Not only does it put your name out there, it puts a voice to your name, and it puts your story out there as well. Um, Leaving voicemails, calling field offices, getting yourself on their radar is the best way that you can become an effective advocate for food and farm. Share your story. This is my favorite part about advocating because every single person here is unique and has their own story and experience as to why they work with Slow Food, why they're doing farm and advocate work or farm and agriculture work. And it's super, super important that your representative knows why the food and farm system is important to you. I also want to emphasize that you have the power here. You are technically their boss. It's kind of how I see things in Congress. If I voted someone into office, I would hope that they'd be interested in hearing my story and why food and farm is important. You are their boss and you put them in power. And it's time that they listen to you. It's important to share your story and why you put them where they are. Again, this is just know your members of Congress. I cannot stress enough that you are their boss. And so many people make fun of me all the time for saying that, but it's so true that the way our government is designed, it's for us to co-govern and work together to find solutions that work practically for our communities. And if your member of Congress doesn't know you exist, how do you expect them to advocate for your community? So reach out, give them a call. I know it can be intimidating, but I really would recommend doing it. If you are like some of my friends, a lot of them are like, I don't know what to say. What do I do? Why is this important? Like, what do I even say if I give them a call? And this is just a very brief, like condensed script that if you want to screenshot, please do. Or take a picture, take a photo, whatever. I think it's important that you know what to say and start by thinking about your story, why your legislator should care about the issues like climate change, like conservation practices, like soil health. Why should they care? And what do you have to say about that issue as well? And how does that impact you and your community that you're working with? Start with, hi, my name is Lindsay and I'm a constituent in your district. I'm calling you to ask to co-sponsor the Ag Resilience Act, prioritizing funding for farmers of color in the next Farm Bill. Whatever you want from them, keep it simple, keep it sweet, support programs like CSP or EQIP in the next Farm Bill. It doesn't need to be this long-winded answer or this long-winded script, but if you want it to be, you can. You work for them, or they work for you. And take action. Sign up for NSAC Communications. I'm going to put a link in the chat again, and I will chat a little bit about what Action Alerts and Weekly Roundup actually does and what they are as programs. So our Action Alerts get sent out to anyone who is interested in taking action with NSAC. For example, Action Alerts get sent out when marker bills get introduced. If there are any critical points that we need food and farm allies to take action to lobby the representative, that'll all get sent via an action alert. I encourage you to sign up if you're interested in sign-on letters, if you're interested in scripts, if you're interested in any type of lobbying, sign up for action alerts because it'll definitely, you'll get a ping from NSAC anytime there's a critical opportunity for you to take action in DC. We also have our weekly roundup, which is written by our policy fellow at NSAC. Her name is Hamsa. She's the best. She writes a weekly kind of blog, I would call it, of what's going on in DC this week. So anything from like bills that have been introduced to any new funding or any kind of Hill updates. Hamsa will send that out in the weekly roundup. I would recommend subscribing to both of these if you're interested in just knowing the general context and like content of what goes on the day-to-day basis, or the day-to-day in DC. And join and follow an organization. You all are already doing the work. Slow Food does great stuff. I will say though, it doesn't hurt to build allies. Join and follow other ally organizations as well, and talk to each other. That's probably the number one piece of advice I give to folks who are like, I don't even know why I care. Like, I'm gonna go downstairs and tell my family about this presentation and why they should care about the Farm Bill. And you should too. You know, we're all great humans here and have a vast network of folks that I'm sure would love to take action with you. I just talked a lot, and I'm going to pass it back to Brett, but I really encourage y'all to ask questions. I'm going to go back through the chat and see if there's anything that I can answer. But Brett, please take it away.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen actually so that I can see folks, but does anyone have any questions?
There was one a bit earlier from Kathy, from Stephanie to Kathy Day about marker bills, and how are marker bills identified versus other bills? And are the bills Senator Booker recently introduced to make marker bills?
That's a great question. There's no way to specify within the way that bills are entered that there are a markup bill. The only way you can really know is either if you're paying attention, for example, to our weekly roundups. And so everybody's welcome to sign up and get those alerts. Or if you happen to already know that that is a kind of legislation that fits into the Farm Bill. We've gone through some of that. So if you are paying attention to the legislation being introduced, you can get a good sense of what's likely to be Farm Bill associated. So we had the Justice for Black Farmers Act reintroduced recently. That is intended as a marker bill. We have the Climate Stewardship Act, we have the Agricultural Resilience Act. These two acts focused on climate. Both of those are also intended as marker bills for the Farm Bill. But there is a huge range of legislation out there that has been put out as marker bills to go into the Farm Bill. If there's something in particular that you're interested in, always glad to answer questions on our end. You can find my email address on our website if you wanted to ask particular questions about something related to climate. Same for our other staffers who work on other policy areas. And if there is, if you have something of particular interest around climate, I will say there is a blog post that I put out sometime last fall that summarizes a lot of the legislation that's out there, because most of the legislation related to climate was already introduced as a marker bill back in April of last year and will likely be reintroduced this year. So you can get at least a strong sense for what is already out there. But there's no particular set of words that gets attached to a marker bill to set it aside as such. It's just kind of knowing the inside baseball of it.
Any other questions or things folks wanted more insight on? I'll add, we talked a lot about farmers and getting input from them, but everyone is affected by the Farm Bill because everybody eats and everybody has to live in our environment. And there is literally a part of the Farm Bill that for everyone. So like I'm working with a bank right now to talk about the credit title and how they can be supporting small farmers through the credit title more effectively. So yeah, no matter what you're passionate about, there's some advocacy to be done around the Farm Bill to support that area. So yeah, I again strongly encourage y'all to reach out to your representatives, connect with your Slow Food chapter, and yeah, just like have your voices heard.
And just one more reminder of how often do farm bills come along, and why is it is that rarity why this Farm Bill is so important?
So they're passed every 5 years, which is actually, it's like more common. I think the only other two bills are child nutrition reauthorization and the defense spending are like as reviewed as the Farm Bill. But yeah, it's just a huge opportunity to get legislation passed. And like Kathy was saying with the marker bills, it's such a good opportunity to get things passed, because we have seen all the times that Congress gets held up for one bill on its own and all the things that get snuck into those. And so having this larger piece of legislation that we again see as a must pass bill is really effective. I don't know, Kathy or Lindsay, if you want to add to that.
I was just going to add as well, timing is wonky depending on where Congress is at. So it currently is scheduled to be reauthorized, or it needs to be reauthorized by September 30th. I think we did the math recently, and Congress only has like less than 90 voting days left before the summer recess. So, or this year, I think. Point being, though, is everything is entirely dependent on how fast Congress moves. And given the thin margins in both the House and the Senate, who knows? That's why I'm really, really emphasizing the sooner that you reach out and start establishing relationships with folks, the better, because you have power, and the sooner that they hear from you, they may be more likely to move faster if they know that this is something that the constituents really care about. Kathy, you probably have a better policy analysis of timing, but that's just my grassroots take.
Sure, I can just add a little bit more history, and that the past couple of farm bills passed very differently from each other. So the 2014 Farm Bill was supposed to be the 2012 Farm Bill. So it went through 2 rounds before it actually got to where it was passed on the floor. And we have somewhat similar congressional split to what we had with what would have been the 2012 Farm Bill. Things are very close, things are very divided. And typically farm bills tend to be passed in a fairly bipartisan fashion. They try to get to a point where both sides are somewhat in agreement on things, which is interesting since we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which carries some of our top farm bill priorities in a brand new separate reauthorization. So this is going to be a very strange farm bill cycle for those of us watching the conservation and agriculture energy policy, because some of that's already been reauthorized and is fully ready to go, even if another farm bill doesn't get passed. But there's a lot in the farm bill that, if it were to not be passed, and if Congress weren't to essentially give an extension to the existing farm bill, it would revert to very old legislation, some cases from the 50s and in some cases from the 30s. So ideally, we really do want to see it passed this year, because September 30th, the current bill is done without an extension. But we also want to see a good farm bill passed. So on our end, what we're very much hopeful for is that we end up with a really strong farm bill, because there is already that support for strong conservation measures and continuing strong support for the nutrition measures that we talked about earlier too. So we hope to see it passed this year, but there really are no guarantees, especially because of the short timeline that's left, as Lindsay laid out already. But Senate and House both are pushing as fast as they can to get things moving.
Stephanie, I see your hand.
Hi, thanks, Brett. I was just curious what you all think will be some of the biggest sticking points that may cause some for the Farm Bill not to pass.
I think, to be honest, SNAP is something I'm hearing a lot. Folks are not, a lot of more conservative, fiscally conservative folks are wondering how we're going to pay for it, and where the money is going to come from. And so there are more extreme sides of that, but yeah, Kathy and Lindsay, that's the part I have heard the most pushback about.
Yeah, that's an important one. I think almost every round, and we have had a large Republican caucus come out saying that they want to separate the nutrition title from the rest and do it as separate legislation. But the leadership, including leadership on the Republican side of the House, is not interested in that option. They are continuing to support SNAP, yes. So as long as they do an effective job of leading the Republican caucus, we should still see the whole nutrition title kept in. Another piece that's really controversial is just essentially anything to do with climate, from the Agriculture Resilience Act to particular elements of what USDA has been doing that are not actually in the Farm Bill, but USDA has been using the Commodity Credit Corporation to fund these things. Broadly speaking, the leadership on the House Republican side has come out and to say this is not going to be a climate farm bill. The details of what that looks like, though, are probably still to be worked out because there are some Republicans who have strong interest in shaping things for climate change. It's just they have different ideas about what that looks like than are, for example, in the Agricultural Resilience Act in many cases. So I think that's going to be a complicated one. And there may be, kind of hoping there will be some strong discussions about what the crop insurance program looks like. So we'll have to see about that going forward.
And I see we're short on time. Joe, I see your hand up. Maybe this will be our last question. And again, we'll all put our emails in the chat. Feel free to follow up, not to offer that for y'all, but what's up, Joe?
Sure. I just wanted to add that I think there are many on the conservative side who are not interested in discussing anything about climate, but they want to know how business can prosper from this. So if you can frame it that climate change is actually a detriment to business profits, for example, that may be a better approach. I find that works with Jack Bergman up here in the Upper Peninsula. Also, there's the carbon tax and so forth that is, I believe, a part of this farm bill as well. And the carbon border adjustments. U.S. industries are going to be at an unfair advantage if the USA does not have a carbon tax and the rest of the world does. So these issues are intertwined.
Totally. And I think I don't know if I said this, I live in rural North Carolina. My representative is pretty conservative. And I still meet with him and connect with him because if he sees the benefits that these programs have to small farmers in his community, he might support them, but he also might just decide not to be so opposed to them. And in my book, that's a win too. Like if we can get a really conservative vocal representative to say, I'm sitting this debate out, that can be the turning point. So we take wins where we can get them for sure. And yeah, I like that point. Just like sharing your story, like Lindsay said, is super powerful. And yeah, thank y'all again so much for coming. It's awesome to have so many slow food folks from all across the country in one Zoom room. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
I'd like to thank you all again for presenting and thank everyone for coming in to learn about the Farm Bill. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Great job, everyone. Hi, Brett. See you soon.
Yes, hey Denisa, thanks for coming.